are we going to see more of the scope of this story in the form of the time jumps? Let's take a look at Foundation Episode 4. As always, I'm Al and this is the Geek in Review. Now, spoiler alert if you haven't seen Foundation Episode 4, which is already aired on Apple TV. Now, this episode opens 35 years after the Star Bridge's destruction, which again, the event of this is an anchor point for the audience to sort of let us know where we are in terms of the general story when the time jumps happen. But this episode doesn't really jump about or play with time that much compared to the last few that we've had. We do get more opening monologues about the fall of cultures and how Harry's equation has impacted the world and the galaxy in general. Psychoscience seems to have taken on a sort of, not religious element, but it has a sort of near religious following. Now, I've said this in my previous videos, but because no one really understands Harry's work but Harry and a few others, the rest do have to take on faith that this plan, or the first stages of this plan, is going to work. So I can totally understand why some people might see Psychoscience or the Foundation as sort of a religious, not sect, but group, I would say, or why it would attract some sort of religious following. Now, as I said, it does require faith, but it does require more maths. We do get to see more of the Empire in this episode, and it starts with Brother Day, who now seems to be a teenager, anywhere between about 15 and 19, I would say. And he's not having a very great time of it. He seems to be very bored of his existence no matter what he's doing. He does actually try and attempt suicide at one point in the show, and he's protected by that force field that we've seen protect the older brother. I think it was in the second episode. So not only does it stop people harming them, but it also stops them from harming themselves, because he tries to jump off the top of a high building to kill himself, and the force shield protects him before he falls. And this does make a lot of sense, as always, because if one of these guys was assassinated, it would break the sort of genetic dynasty. And I wonder if that has ever happened. I wonder if they are going to go back on that, because they are leaning heavily into the genetic dynasty in these first few episodes. So we've already seen quite a lot of them in the past, but it's mostly been the original Cleon. We're now on Cleon the 14th, so I wonder what happened between 1 and 4. We've also seen 13, 12, 11 and I think 10, so yeah, it'll be interesting to see if any of these Cleons were a bit sort of divergent or didn't agree with the other ones. Now, going back to the sort of religious elements of the show, this isn't really in the book. I have had a few requests to do videos or highlight more about the differences from the book, and I've decided I'm not really going to focus on individual episodes. I'm just going to do a general overview once the season has finished, because some things in the book might pop up in the wrong order in the show. This has already happened with one of the characters that's in a prequel novel that isn't in the trilogy, has already been in the show. So I don't want to potentially ruin anything for the show or myself by getting too heavily into that. But if you do want to see that video, make sure you're subscribed to the channel so you don't miss it, and a like to this video would mean a lot as well. So as I was saying, there is a bit more religious element in the show than there is in the books, and if someone called Proxima Midnight has died, another character called Zephyr Gallet, I think I might be pronouncing that wrong, has taken over their place. But there's a sort of rank outsider whose beliefs are challenging the Empire a little bit and are considered to be a little bit radical. Basically, this person believes that the soul is individual, meaning that once you're dead, that's it. So the clones are essentially empty vessels. And since the first Cleon's dead, his soul is gone. So again, these guys just essentially mean nothing. So it is going to be at least maybe a bit of a challenge to their power base going forward. That is another sign that everything is starting to get a little bit disturbed in the Empire, maybe a little bit quicker than they were expecting. Now, like the previous episode, this is a bit of an episode of two halves, so we do get quite a lot going on in Terminus as well. The Anachronians have landed and they want to go to the vault, but they need to overcome a bunch of defences, basically the null field that surrounds the vault, and there's also a sort of energy field that surrounds the colony, protecting it like a shield as well. So this is where Salvor steps in, as she's the warden of Terminus. In the books, I think the title is actually Mayor, but again, in the books it is a guy. And Salvor is the only one that can approach the vault, and it does seem that she's a bit more sort of acclimatised or in tuned to the planet. Whether that's by design, I don't know. But she does certainly seem to be a leader among the people in Terminus. She discusses what action they need to take to deal with the threat of the people that are landing. And I think she has been set up to be the colony leader because they don't seem to have one clear leader on Terminus. There's the encyclopedists who work with the Foundation. They're the ones that we've seen discussing things that should be kept, or knowledge that should be kept and preserved for the future. But they're also under the idea that the Empire is going to show up and save them, although they can't get in contact with the Empire because the Anakinans have disabled a sort of communication satellite between there and Trantor. But Salvor manages to capture one of the Anakinans and it turns out to be the leader. Now, this bit does get very interesting and delving into a lot of questions about Salvor. She's incredibly intuitive when it comes to people, and maybe she's a sort of missing piece of Harry's equation, because the one thing that it can't do is determine individual fate. But in this episode we see Salvor sort of perform a few tasks or abilities, or display a few abilities, sort of being able to predict things and control things in a way that we haven't seen so far. She's also, as I said, the only one that's able to get close to the vault, and she's also seeing visions from the vault as well of a young child. And during the attack on the colony, Salvor does have flashbacks to the library on Trantor. Now, whether these are hallucinations or whether they're communications, that remains to be seen. But if you know anything about the book, you know that Harry Seldon is going to pop back up. So maybe this is some sort of communication from beyond the grave from Harry. We still don't really know what the vault is. There is a sort of direct, almost comparison in the books, but the setup is a little bit different. I'm not going to discuss it at all because I don't want to ruin it, or I don't want to be wrong in case the TV show is going to go in another direction. Going back to Trantor, there's a little bit of disagreement between the clones or the genetic dynasty. Dusk wants to go to the funeral of Proxima Opal to be a little bit, or seem to be a little bit more hands-on in the public and the Empire. And we see the now teen Dawn, who's back in his autistic streak after the first Dusk we're introduced with. Again, it's similarities in these characters that these are genetic traits. And although at this point in Trantor it's been 35 years since the Starbridge attack, the effects are still being felt. The current Empire, all three of them, watched the chat between what was Brother Day and is now Brother Dusk and Harry. So you have to remember, it's the older version that we're seeing chatting to Harry when he was a bit younger. I'm probably not going to go into this in every episode, because if you don't understand how the genetic dynasty works, you're not going to understand the show. So at this point, after this video, I think I'm going to stop explaining it. But the two younger clones aren't happy about the way that Brother Dusk handled the chat with Harry and the outcome of that, and the fact that he didn't really heed Harry's advice. Because Harry laid out essentially what was going to happen, although there wasn't a specific time frame, and they see it that Brother Dusk sort of done the absolute minimum that he could at the time. Whether he didn't believe Harry or he was just waiting for it to pan out, I did mention that I think in my first video. I think Dusk's thinking at the time was, well, I don't think he's right, but just in case he is right, we're going to let him go off and work on his own. The Empire have also been trying to study Harry's theories in math for the last 35 or 40 years, and they're not having much luck either. Although these mathematicians think he's wrong because the Empire's expanded and not collapsing, but the Empire is worried about recent events. I should say that Brother Day is worried about recent events. Guys can't say that Harry's wrong, but they also can't prove that he's 100% right either. So even after 40 years, or nearly 40 years, people still can't get their heads around Harry's work. Now, we haven't seen anything of GAEL yet, but I suspect she's going to pop back up. And we do find out that cryogenic suspension, or hypersleep, or whatever you want to call it, does exist in this world. So we may get her at some point in the future, or we might get her directly after the events, but given the fact that we can see that there's a struggle to understand Harry's work after all these years, and we know that GAEL has a really good handle on it, at the time in Trantor, before the Starbridge fell, she was the only person that really understood it other than Harry. She's got to come back, and I hope we get to see a little bit more of her soon. But yeah, it is great to see that the clones aren't necessarily getting along. Brother Day isn't happy with Dusk, and he blames him for the start of the fall of the Empire for ignoring all the warnings that Harry mentioned. Dusk thinks that he's obsessed with Harry, but Day is sidelining Dusk here to basically just be a pawn. And this happens a lot in politics, and hey man, if you're going to fuck over anyone, you're going to fuck over yourself first, because you know your own strengths and weaknesses. And when you think about it, the younger clones spend all their time studying the older ones. So if they do, as I mentioned, want to deviate or change their sort of behaviour, it's going to be hard to anticipate it, at least from the older one or Brother Dusk point of view. So it does look as if Brother Day might be trying to break the cycle. And is this a good thing? Because Harry warned that the Empire was the thing that was causing the problem because they didn't evolve. But maybe one of the clones going renegade and trying to start their own thing might cause a civil war or start some sort of conflict, and it will cause the fall sooner. It would certainly cause a division within the Empire that we already know is fractured. Or is this just some sort of damage control that he's trying to do? As always, we're going to have to wait and see. I know a lot of people thought the pace of this episode wasn't great, but to be honest, I did really enjoy it. The stuff on Terminus was pretty well done, and I'm looking to see a little bit more of what's happened in the sort of 30 or 40 years that they've been on the planet. But as always, we're going to have to wait and see. Let me know what you think of this episode in the comments below. If you've made it this far, please leave a like on the video. And as always, I'm Al, this has been the Geek in Review. Thanks for watching.